So you guys have mentioned Charles spinning off, and it felt like that was kind of the biggest headline because it could have been an incredible race between those first two. What did you guys make of the mistake that he made?
Well, unfortunately, these mistakes do happen with Charles Leclerc. We've seen it throughout his career, and in previous years, he didn't really have a car capable of fighting for the championship. So in some ways, it was forgivable that he was putting absolutely everything on the line to try and win. But this time, you know, the championship's on the line, the race win was on the line. And really, when you're up against someone as good as Max Verstappen, if you look at Max's championship year last year, it's really hard to find a single mistake in there. And that's what you need to do to get a championship together. And at the moment, Leclerc's on 2 mistakes in 12 races. There was a spin in Imola where he spun out of 3rd position and dropped 7 points effectively in the championship. And now he's dropped 25. And after the race, he said, look, if I carry on like this, I don't deserve to be world champion. And also, he said, if he loses the championship by 32 points, he can point exactly to where those points got lost, and that will be entirely on him. So we know that Ferrari have given him problems so far this year, both reliability issues and strategy issues. And of course, that must have put a bit of extra pressure on him to perform, to go for victories like he was going for in France. But at the same time, you know, he cannot afford to be making these mistakes. And really, I think that's the kind of thing that is going to decide the championship, arguably already has decided the championship.
Yeah, it was absolutely gut-wrenching to see that, because I agree with Laurence. Like it feels like the championships. I mean, there's still enough time left for things to turn around, but Laurence is completely right. With Max Verstappen, like, is he really going to drop the ball that many times? Are Red Bull going to drop the ball that many times? And I think that the most depressing thing is that I think the championship order is the wrong way around. To, you know, if this was Leclerc leading by this much and Verstappen behind, I'd still back them to be going to the final race of the season, because Red Bull and Verstappen, they're the perfect package, really. And Ferrari, you know, kind of in every area, kind of lacking every so often. So yeah, it was just seeing that happen. I was like, I couldn't believe it. And for a driver to spin off on their own in the dry, in the lead, I mean, that's almost unheard of. That, you know, Vettel did it a few years ago in the rain in Germany, which was also Ferrari, and also felt like a Ferrari driver letting a championship slip through his fingers. So maybe if you're not in a Ferrari car, it's difficult to do. But yeah, just absolutely horrible to see.
I think that was, and we've said this before this season, that though was the most painful radio message I think that we have heard all season. Now, I will say this, for a young driver, I feel like a lot of times you see some not want to shoulder the responsibility and point the finger elsewhere. To his credit, afterwards, when we got to hear from him, he's raising his hand saying, that's on me. It's my mistake. I have to be better. And to your point, Laurence, if I'm not better in these situations, I don't deserve to win a championship. So I thought that was a little bit refreshing. I don't know what you guys thought about kind of his approach to it, but I thought that he was very mature in what he had to say afterwards.
Yeah, Charles has always been like that, actually. I referenced the Baku mistake that he made a couple of years ago in qualifying, and he hit the barriers and he immediately opened the radio channel and said, I am stupid, I am stupid. And he does, you know, he is quite open about the mistakes he makes, and he's also quite open about how he goes about trying to get over it. But I was talking to some people in the media centre after the race, and one of them pointed out you'd never hear Max or Lewis make that kind of comment. You know, they would never kind of put themselves down like that openly in the media. They may well think it behind closed doors. But then somebody else made the point, well, Lewis and Max don't really make mistakes like that. So that's the other side to it. So it's a clear weakness of Charles. And, you know, it's a tricky one because he's also an incredibly fast driver. And arguably, to get to the levels that he gets to put in the qualifying lap times that he puts in, he has to take certain risks. And those risks will sometimes not pay off. So really, I think with him to be the more rounded driver, it's a little bit more of that risk assessment. He didn't actually have to push that hard at that point in the race. If he wanted to maintain track position over Max, sure. But Ferrari's strategy, and they've said this since, was actually fine. We concede the position, but we get the fresher tyres for the end of the race, like I said earlier, to go and push and to try and overtake Max. So it's a real balance with Charles, and I feel like he hasn't quite found it yet.
Yeah, it's so true as well, isn't it, about Lewis and Max? I mean, I actually went back through yesterday and just looked through last season. I was like, I'm trying to find big mistakes they made. And I think each of them made one mistake. Lewis had that at Imola where he went off and he kind of got lucky and unlucky in the same point. You know, he went off, got beached in the gravel, which was pretty unlucky. Safety car came out, etc., but was pretty flawless for the rest of the season. The only time Max did anything was actually that lap in Saudi in qualifying when he was already third on the grid, was pushing. So but he already had third on the grid. Like he knew that was the best he had. He probably didn't have the quickest car there, and he obviously hit the wall just going for it. And other than that, you didn't really see it. So yeah, it's such a good point. And with Leclerc, it's so much easier to go through. Like you find yourself stopping, like, oh, there was a mistake here, there was a mistake here. Monaco a few years ago, he had pole and he crashed. So yeah, it is at the moment, if you were to compare him with those two guys, that's why I wouldn't personally yet put him in that kind of top tier with those other two guys. It's just lacking. But yeah, he's young, like you said, Katie. So hopefully it's something you can kind of, he can kind of round those edges off in his driving style and kind of get over that.
Yeah, well, he wasn't also the only one who made a mistake. I think the team at the pit wall also wish they could get back a decision that they decided to make. So in the other Ferrari, you had Carlos Sainz, who started at the back of the grid, makes his way all the way up into the top 4. Then he suffers a 5-second penalty. And before that, though, what happened between the pit wall and him, asking him to pit while he's in the middle of an overtake, and the indecision, I just think was incredible to watch on the radio messages. So Nate, what do you think happened there?
Yeah, those Ferrari radio messages are just insane. I mean, I think Ferrari were probably, I think it probably sounded a lot worse than it was. I think that those radio messages usually delayed a little bit. So I feel like it was probably in that back straight before the chicane. But Ferrari would have known he was still battling Perez. So while he probably wasn't going wheel to wheel with Perez, they would have known their drivers there. I mean, they should have been communicating like, hey, we can see you're battling Perez. They should have been telling him either ease off, you're coming in to pit this lap, or keep going, we'll pit you another lap. So I think we've talked about this before, haven't we? That Mercedes and Red Bull, again, we're going to compare Ferrari to the other teams, but their radio comms at those other two teams are a lot more, it just seems like there's a lot more, I guess, clarity, a lot more assuredness behind them. Ferrari's just never seemed like that. And yeah, he had Carlos at one point. I mean, it was a slip of the tongue, but they said you've got a 5-second stop go penalty, and he's like, no, it's just 5 seconds at the end of the pit. And you're just like, why is it always Ferrari that has these messages? It's never another team that has these messages where a driver's correcting them. I mean, Sainz and Silverstone had he was like, stop making it. I can't remember the exact quote now, but it was like, you're making things up or something like that. And it's just bizarre. So I think at the time it sounded like Sainz was pretty confused with it. I mean, he's stepped out of the car twice during that weekend and said our strategy calls have actually been better than people have given us credit for. I'm not sure what Laurence thinks about that, but I think that was, it felt like he was just kind of towing the party line there, because they haven't really been great. It's been pretty obvious to see that. But yeah, just pretty poor all around. I think that Ferrari probably made, in hindsight, a decent call because you had that penalty, but it just seemed like they could, if they'd kept him out, there could be a safety car. He could have pitted for fresh tires. There was that virtual safety car later that that if it stayed out, he could have benefited from. So I don't know. It did just seem like they were kind of making up as they went along, from what we heard. And then of course they gave him, like, just after Leclerc crash, they pit him, bring him out, and they get an unsafe release penalty. So it was just kind of a classic day of Ferrari just doing everything. And if you were watching for the first time, you must have thought, is this the Ferrari that everyone talks about being the greatest team in F1? Like, I don't see it myself. I just don't see it. So they don't do themselves any favors, sadly.
Laurence, do you think that their team strategy has been better than maybe we've given them credit for?
No, I think it has been a weakness throughout the year. Monaco, they managed to shuffle Leclerc from a race lead down to 4th. At Silverstone, they could have double stacked their cars in the pit stop, and therefore, held on to what would have likely been a 1-2. They didn't. They only gave Sainz the tire advantage. He went on to win the race, but Leclerc again got shuffled backwards. So there's 2 examples, I think, where the strategy really was lacking. The strange thing about the French one was not so much the decision to pit, because they actually had to pit. They've since explained this. There's a number of things. One, yes, that radio call they said was in turn 10, which is seen, so it's just after the long straight, and that high-speed right-hander. Sainz overruled that because he wanted to get past Perez. To be honest, Sainz shouldn't have overruled that. He should have pitted, because that made sense. But really what they should have done is pitted several laps earlier, because as soon as they pitted under the safety car, they had to do 35 laps to the end. And their data was telling them that the medium tyre, which Sainz had to be put onto because you have to use both compounds in the race, could only do 25 laps. So there was this 10 laps that they were always not going to be able to do at the end on those tyres. But given that knowledge, they probably should have pitted him earlier. Sure, he would have dropped back a long way because he had the 5-second penalty, which he would have served at the pit stop, as well as the pit stop itself, which is very slow in France compared to other tracks. So you lose a lot of time. So yes, he would have dropped right down the order, probably as low as 13th or so. But on those new tyres, he would have been able to fight back. Realistically, could he have got a better result? Like maybe he would have pushed for fourth. But I think, they would have absolutely had to nail the timing of the pit stop, got a bit lucky with traffic coming back through. So I can see what Sainz is saying. Given the result that was on the table, probably there wasn't much they could do. The only other thing they could have done is gamble on their estimation that the tyres would last 25 and just hope they last the extra 10. But then you're dealing with a potential tyre failure, which of course is very, very dangerous. And also, in that case, a potential double DNF. Can you imagine if we'd had a situation where Leclerc had put it in the barriers by himself, and then Ferrari's strategy had resulted in a tyre failure that then put Sainz in the barrier, and then you've got the repair bill on top. So I understand why they did it. I don't think this was the biggest strategy bungle of the year, but it's without doubt the case that it's a weakness of Ferrari compared to Red Bull and Mercedes, and it's a big enough weakness to cost championships. I like I said earlier, I can't really see Leclerc getting back into this championship, but if he does, every single strategy call from now on has to be bang on the money, and I just can't see Ferrari doing that based on what we've seen so far this year.
I love their messages as well, because they always seem to have an endless amount of plans, don't they? They're like, right, it's plan F now, plan G, and you're like, how many scenarios are you discussing before the race? Like, I'm sure there are loads, but just like, again, they're the only team that seem to have this long list of them. I can't get my head around it. So maybe, and if I can barely remember 2 plans, if I'm going into work. So if you're driving an F1 car, you're like, right, plan F, which one was that? I can't quite remember now. Like, so maybe there's something there as well. Who knows?
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.